For example, the home that I bought, I got an additional 12% off on the property for making a 25% payment versus a 20% payment every month. And so that depends on how much of a discount that you bargain and value of your house and your liquidity conditions.
So they are looking at it from a present value of money. Give me more money now, it's better than you giving me some more money towards the end.
Absolutely.
Cool. So, Aditya, maybe we'll do this in a way which helps me and the folks on the call. If I was to start looking at purchasing a property now, I am an NRI, I'm sitting here in Singapore with you, and I want to start that process, right? What would be the right way to get to know of properties, especially projects that are coming up? Because again, my understanding is that the prices of these properties are the cheapest if you buy them pre-launch. Obviously, once they're on the market, then it's market value. So what is the right way of identifying upcoming projects, especially ones which are NRI friendly and want NRI invest? How do you go about figuring those?
Yeah. So there's a lot of factors which go into these decisions, right? So firstly, I think you have to identify, are you planning to invest in the property or are you planning to buy it for your own use? And I think this is obvious, right? So everyone thinks about this first step. And then after that comes the fact that, most people are not sure of where they want to stay. For you, probably it is which city do I want to stay in?
Yeah.
For some others, it is what locality, because, buying it in one locality versus the other in a place like Bangalore typically means that you either have to travel 2 hours each way, depending on where you get your job, right? So that itself is a big decision to make. But once you've identified the city, my first advice is that go in and just buy it, right? Because you know that you will buy it. If not now, you will buy it 3 years down the line or 5 years down the line. And it is a tautology in Indian real estate that prices always go up. They are either stagnant or they go up. I've, at least in my living memory, have not seen prices go down. And so it's always better to buy it today than 3 years down the line. Uh, because we have the energy and the ability to stay on longer and work for longer and be able to repay all of this. Whereas if you push this decision far out, the one thing that I have realized is that I initially wanted to buy a villa for my own use, and my budget for buying was like 2.5 crores. By the time I started actually going and doing the research for the areas that I like and the prices of the villas, in Bangalore itself, nothing was available for 3.5, 4 crores. So whatever you can afford will always be less than what is the actual price in the place that you want. So there is no better time to buy a property than now if you have decided that you will buy it.
Right.
So that's the first part. Yeah.
So let's say I have decided I want to buy it in Bangalore. I keep Bangalore city because really we have more knowledge on this forum from Bangalore. So let's say I have decided Bangalore, right? Let's say I've decided Whitefield. So let's say I have picked on Whitefield. I want to purchase something there. Now, what would be the ideal way for me to start? Do you go about hunting on any of these websites, or do you go to these property fairs, the kind that happen? Is there another way for NRIs to kind of get to know what's available in the market?
Yeah. So for me, the things that have worked are three different sources. Right? One is property fairs. They give you an idea of the landscape because every builder is literally sitting next to each other. You can walk to every one of them and ask them, okay, what is the price of your flat in Whitefield? And they will give you the price and you get a pretty good idea of what the prices are in that area. So that is one part. The second part is obviously, relatives and friends that you have in that area who can tell you what the prices are. Thirdly, what I always do is I go in and sign up for, so let's say the big builders in my area are Prestige, Shobha, Total Environment, and, 4 or 5 of them. I actually give my email to them. Right? So I have a junk email, which I keep for all of my real estate stuff. They keep pumping me with emails and I keep looking out saying, okay, there is a new launch there and a new launch here and so on. And that gives me an idea of the price of, apartments in that area or, villa. So that is my market research. But then it will vary. So the kind of research that you do will vary depending on what you want to buy. So in this case, we're taking the example of an apartment or a villa that I want to buy for preferably self-use or for investment. Yeah. And so in that case, all of these work. But if you want to buy land or for commercial purposes, like you want to build something and make it a PG and rent it out to 15 different bachelors, then the equations change significantly. But in this case, yeah, this holds good.
Okay. Does anyone want to dive in deeper into the other kinds, buying land or?
I have a question on the city specifically. There is one element you try to buy in the city where you're from, hometown, then you might have friends and relatives who will have knowledge. But if you're not from the big cities, do you recommend people look at real estate in these cities?
Is your question that if you're not from a big city, should you buy in a big city or should you buy in
Yes.
your hometown? That's the question. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, this is something that is quite personal, right? Like if for me, I would still eventually go back to Bangalore because that's a city where I'd most likely get a job or I would probably stay in, right? My other city and my hometown is, Hyderabad. So I might choose between Hyderabad or Bangalore. Fortunately for me, both are big cities and both are growing and so on. But if you're going to decide that when you go back, you'll probably stay in your hometown, then, that's something where the choice becomes
Yes.
personal.
So the question is from an investment perspective purely, from the perspective of investment, not to stay. So
Yeah.
if you're looking just to invest in a property in India, and if you don't have any close relatives around in that city, how do you approach it? Do you even consider it? Yeah, I think it's too risky.
This is where you'd have to look at other factors, right? And other factors would typically mean, I think a very good example of things to look at when you're investing would be, are there major projects that are announced by the state government or the central government in that area, right? Typically, real estate involves around speculation and activity, right? So if your town or your city is seeing absolutely no activity for the past 20 years, like for example, my wife is from Goa and the village or the town that she's from has seen zero new places and zero new buildings come up in that area forever in the past 10 years that we've been married. And so property prices are pretty much stagnant. Nothing ever grows there. Right? Even within Goa, if you look at the places where there is the activity or there are, central government projects that are coming up, that is probably the area where you should be putting your money in. And this again comes from contacts, acquaintances, research that you do by yourself and so on. One example is that, like Hyderabad, for example, about 60 to 80 kilometers from Hyderabad, there's a lot of expansion that's happening in terms of the state government building pharma, trying to encourage pharma industries and so on there. And although, would you call it Hyderabad? Literally 100 kilometers away, right? So, but then that by virtue of being around that area, that there is something that's coming up there. And the thing that I do typically is I would go around and go to those areas and just I'm actually passionate about this, so I do it. I actually go there and start asking people, right? So, what is the going rate here? And you never ask the owner of the land because they'll probably inflate it or whatever, but you ask the people working on the land saying, what is the going rate here? How much are they selling an acre for, right? And you will get the idea of what they're doing. Same holds good for any area. That the one thing that I found in India is that people are very willing to talk to you. So you just have to ask, and that's the one approach that I use. Apart from looking out for the news, yeah, I look very keenly for where ring roads are getting launched or where new metro stations are getting launched. Because typically, where metro stations are getting launched, around the area is when you see activity. Where new malls are getting launched, right? So these three or four tidbits to look for would tell you where the investment is coming into this city. Another big thing is an SEZ. If an IT park or an SEZ is getting launched, you can rest assured that the property prices are going to, skyrocket in that.
Great advice, man. Thank you.
Let's say we've identified an area I want to purchase a property for myself, live in Bangalore, Whitefield, and we found some from the resources that we said. We've gone to a property fair, we've identified a builder who has potential property there. So, what are the things you would look for, or what is it you would look for to make sure that the pricing is okay? Like, are there any kind of formulas, metric, any other way of figuring out this is a good return on investment to buy at this price in this area? And also, I think, and this is the one that I've been most excited to know about, is how exactly does the financing work for NRIs? Because I don't think it's the normal home loan system or with the normal mortgage system that you get, or maybe there is something that you can do. But there are some special offers that they have for NRI, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So let's address the first question and then talk about the
Yeah.
financing. So let's say you've identified the area, you know that this is an area that you are, interested in and would live in. The one thing that I would always do is that there is a what if scenario built into this, right? So I've identified this area to live, but 3 years down the line, I might change my mind. And so I would still be looking at it not purely as a place where I will live in, but I would want some reasonable returns, although primarily it is a place for me to stay in. And this is to essentially take into account the fact that 3 years down the line, my scenario might change. I might just want to liquidate, and I shouldn't be at that point thinking that I should have put this money in an FD and I would have made more. The way I approach this is that I would typically go to a builder and ask them for pre-launch properties. So the way real estate builders work, typically every quarter they increase their prices. So they launch a property about 3 to 4 years before the property would be handed over to you. Let's say the property is going to be handed over in 28. They'll launch the property today. And what they do is from now till 28, they aim to raise the prices every quarter. So that is typically how real estate, builders work. And so if you get a pre-launch property, what you're getting in is a value which will rise some percentage over the, almost 6 or 8 or 12 or 16 times, depending on where you've entered. Now, what will that give you? That will give you that at least when the property is launched or it is ready and if you want to liquidate it, you would have made a decent return on it. And that return would probably be over 4 years. It might be 21, 24, 25%. It'll not be much, but at least it'll not be less than what, an FD would give you. And then what I would do is I would, typically go and ask for offers around this side. So we are NRIs, right? The one thing we have is on an average, we have higher liquidity and higher capacity to spend than a regular Indian. And the builders know this very well. And what they're doing these days is that these guys are actually setting up offices in Dubai and Zurich and Hong Kong and Singapore and so on. Imagine there's a Prestige and Hiranandani and they all have local salespeople sitting here. They know that there's a big NRI market here. And what these guys typically do is they would come in and give you offers for pre-launch properties, wherein, let's say you pay the full amount. So let's say a property costs you, 2 crores. If you have the liquidity and you pay the entire 2 crores up, you're going to get a deeply discounted price. Because think of it from the builder's perspective, right? They need liquidity, right? And how will they get liquidity? A part of it is financed by the bank. But the most part is that they bet on people buying their property. And when people start buying properties, that's when they start making money. And they use that partly for construction and partly for the launch of a subsequent property. And so every builder would mark about 3 to 5 units or 10 units in their apartment, which they will sell it to you for full price if you're willing to pay the entire amount upfront. And so depending on how much you are willing to pay, you get a deeper and a deeper discount. I typically go in at that time, and that would give me that by the time I hit the 4-year mark, I would make about 50 to 60% returns. And depending on how big the builder is and how deep the discount is, there are times where, recently I've made an investment where within a year, I've seen a 75% jump in so they have priced the property for, let's say, 5,000 rupees. By the time they launch it, it's about 9,000 rupees and you just exit it straight away, right? And you get a decent return. And that again ties back into the fact that I told you earlier, right? That exit quickly, right? Don't sit on a property for a longer time. That will give you lesser returns. About the financing.
So before we go to the financing, it was very, very good to know. But the one question I had was, because there is a 4-5 year lag between you getting the property or you're basically putting in money into something you haven't seen, right? It's pre-launch. So you're hoping it does get built and you're hoping it will get delivered. So there is one risk, obviously, that exists. But let's say everything is going fine, but you need to exit from the property for personal reasons. You want to get the liquidity back. Is it possible for you to be able to sell it back to the builder?
So this is where you would go with a reputable builder, but then there is nothing to guarantee a failure. I like to equate real estate investing with stock market investing. They're very similar in a lot of ways. If a stock decides to tank, there's nothing you can do about it. You have done your research and it's a good company and you've looked at their balance sheets and all of that, and then you put in the money. It's the same thing. You get it checked by a lawyer, you check the reputation of the people and all of that before you do the investing. And you hope that, that they're not going to essentially run away with the money. That said, there is RERA now. And so as an investor, you have protection in terms of an escrow account and stuff like that. But still, if a builder decides to cheat you and, get away with this thing, then it's a long process for you to actually recover the money. But to answer your question, you can always go in and sell it back to the builder. And you would make the gains that is at the current market value. So let's say you entered early and you want to exit after 3 years. For the amount that you've repaid, so let's say you repaid 40 or 50%, you will still make the returns on a per square foot basis as it exists today. So whatever is the price today, that is what you will get. You will not lose money on this. And a lot of builders are happy to take this because even for them, they make an extra percentage on every square foot over what they've sold you. So that is
Because they can then sell the same property 3 months down the line at a higher rate.
exactly. And they charge typically, depending on the builder, depending on the price that they've charged, they charge a token amount like 200 rupees or 300 rupees a square feet for you to exit. But the amount you've made would be higher than that anyway.
So what have you seen as financial options for NRIs?
Yeah, so I explored the option of taking a loan when I bought the last property that I did. And it is no different for NRIs. And trust me, dealing with banks as NRIs is as bad as dealing with banks being a domestic, resident Indian. There are no special amenities. There is one bank here. I mean, there is an HDFC, SBI, and an ICICI bank here. You go in here, you're treated well, but then due to Indian banking regulations, you still have to complete the loan going into India. And when you go into India, you get into a branch, you don't get any special treatment because you're an NRI or whatever. You will get, it's the same shoddy treatment that you get away. And that is why I hate going to banks and taking loans.
You have the option of getting a loan from a bank, just like you would back home if you were buying a property. But what are the other financing options? Like you mentioned, you had this scheme of 20% every year for 5 years and then the property years. Are there other ways in which you can have something with the builder where you have an agreement on how exactly the payment schedule will work? Are there other options?
Yeah. So one of the first things is if you have the liquidity, just ask them for an upfront payment plan. That will always give you the deepest discount. The second option is a construction linked payment plan, wherein you will be paying a set amount to the builder depending on different stages of construction. So when there is the foundation done or the first slab done and the third slab done, the fifth slab done and so on, there would be a percentage of your total amount that you would have to pay. And then right at the end, there would be the actual registration, wherein there would be a last bit that you would have to clear, which is typically be around 5% that you have to pay. So that's a second. And then there is a third kind of a plan, wherein it's called a timely payment rebate, wherein there are some builders, depending on your liquidity conditions, you could say that instead of paying 5% or 10% every 6 months or 1 year, you pay them 30% upfront or 40% up. And then you give me a rebate. And that is something builders love because you would typically give them more money than what they're owed. And then you can negotiate down the price. If the builder has thought through this and they're a seasoned builder, they would have something outlined and thought through for this option as well. Like, for example, the home that I bought, I got an additional 12% off on the property for making a 25% payment versus a 20% payment every month. And so that depends on how much of a discount that you bargain and value of your house and your liquidity conditions.
But they are looking at it from a present value of money. Give me more money now, it's better than you giving me some more money towards the end.
Absolutely. Because they are, again, cash strapped. And so the more money you give them, the higher they are willing to discount the whole property for you.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to dive back into from a previous answer you gave, you mentioned you have to deal with different types of people when you're buying your property, different professions when you're buying a property. So you have the registrar's office, you will need a lawyer, you need the builder, maybe a banker. So can you just lay out who are the people we might have to meet during this entire process and what they do, and again, anything to watch out for?
Yeah, if you're dealing with a reputed builder and a big enough builder and so on, typically they have this process ironed out because they would have paid all of the things that are needed to be paid. They would have gone through the entire permissions life cycle. They would have gone through the legality of this. So they would have a lawyer-backed, lawyer-checked set of documents for you. which you can typically trust. But then what I usually do is I go through a lawyer of my own, someone that I trust, and I get them to verify the documents. Because in a city like Bangalore, and this must be true for every city, and I mean, I know for sure that this is the same for Hyderabad as well. What happens is that, these stories that you hear about builders building upon lake beds and stuff, or, flouting environment norms and stuff like that, is actually a very real thing. So the Bangalore Development Authority, for example, publishes areas wherein you are not supposed to build. So I would typically go to the BDA website and check, is this area and is this land actually falling under something like that? And so before I make a purchase, that's something that I do on my own. Whenever the builder is procuring a piece of land, typically what happens is they procure multiple pieces of land. It's very rare that someone has like 60 acres in the middle of Bangalore, right? So they would typically acquire smaller pieces of land from multiple people. And they would ensure that every bit that they buy is connected through a set of sale deeds which link one to another. So your father, your father's father, and so on. Right? So all of this is something that's verified through a link deed process. And so this is something that lawyers typically are very well versed, right? So they know this entire landscape. Just go get it done through them. And then the next thing would be the different permissions that you have to take. For example, for taller buildings, what's happening these days is that buildings in Bangalore are hitting 30, 32, 33 floors, which used to be the norm in Mumbai, but it's not. This is very new for a city like Bangalore. And so there's all, airport authorities of India that has to give permission for these buildings as well. So typically someone in the area would know all of this. So lawyer solve all of these problems. And then the other thing to look out for is which banks have approved loans for this. So typically, when you take a loan, you are pledging your property against the fact that if you default, then the bank takes over your property, right? So they would want to take over a legal property. And so what the bank would do is they would vet the property for you. And so if there is a reputed bank, like the likelihood of it being a legit property and nothing wrong going with it is much higher. And then finally, again, if you have a reputed builder, then they would have taken care of the process of registration. So you would not have to deal with the registrar. All that you would have to do is there is a date of registration. You would pay a certain amount, which includes all kinds of payments. And that is then taken care of for you. You just walk in and get your thing done. If you're buying a land or if you're buying like a standalone apartment like I did, that is when you have to deal with a lot more people, within the registrar's office. And so there's something called an encumbrance certificate, which is essentially the registrar should have a record of this land belonging to the owner that you are buying it from as well. So it's not just they coming and showing you a sale deed and saying that, okay, this is my property, but the registrar should have a record as well. And that is done through something called as an EC, encumbrance certificate. And so you should have, get that encumbrance certificate to verify that this is indeed their property and so on. So again, for someone who is new to this, and just go to a reputed builder, someone who everyone trusts, and you should be good with this entire thing. The easy is, so right now, almost, at least within big cities, I don't know how it is for the rest of the country, but within Bangalore, the EC process, the tax process, the sale deed process, all of this is digitized. So you can actually go and pay like 100 rupees and get records of all of it.
No, I mean, my point of that digitization was that you can't sit at home and be like, okay, I am buying this, I am paying this, and just give me all the documents I need. You still have to go to a government office.
So I've heard of geotagging of properties, and this is as part of the Digital India, initiatives. There is geotagging of properties and so on. I don't know. So at least I have never looked up a system. It's easier for me to just call up an agent that I know and say, just, here's 500 rupees. Get this out from me.
Okay. And these agents, again, can help you through the process. You could involve an agent to do this all for you.
Yeah. So the thing with agents, again, is that you should know them and you should know that they're, trustworthy and so on. And that is why if you go to a reputed builder, you don't have to deal with all of this. But if you're buying a land, if you're buying other things, then you probably need someone who you trust, who can do this for you. Otherwise, the commissions that they take and so on would just simply eat into your profits that you would make later on.
Yeah, fair enough. So the last question, I'm assuming last for today, but the last question I had was the property that you bought, which was initially the one you guys lived, and then you did give out on rent. Now, one of the questions that I have is frequent in our conversations, hypothetical conversations of buying property. We don't intend to move back anytime soon, but there is hope that we will move back at some point. So if we do buy a property and we do rent it out, there would be some involvement of us either going back, finding the tenant, getting them set up, making sure things are fine. And then either we have relatives or friends in that place who can have regular interaction, or if something goes wrong, they can go take care of it. Or I've heard of property management companies now who also do this. So have you tried any of this out, or what do you depend on? And again, any best practices, any advice on how exactly you should manage this?
Letting your house out to a tenant involves dealing with human beings. And whenever you deal with human beings, you can get any kind of and all kinds of experiences. And so I've had all kinds of experiences with my tenants as well. And the one thing I've decided is that I don't want the headache of dealing with people. And I've actually identified a property management firm. There are plenty actually. So there are people who do this within my apartment complex just for bachelors, just for spinsters, and just as a company and so on. So I use No Broker. No Broker is pretty popular within Indian real estate space. There are several plans wherein they take care of the entire hassle of finding a person, taking over the keys from them, cleaning the property for you, handling tenant complaints for you, getting an inspection report done, doing an entire inventory of all the things that are there in your property, and then getting you detailed reports for every 6 months and so on. There are different plans that you have. For example, they also have a plan wherein they assure you that they will find you a tenant. And if they do not find a tenant within, 2 weeks of your plan getting expired, then they will start paying rent for you. So the highest plan is about 6% of your monthly rent that they take. So mine is at about 3%. I was on an older plan, but I've managed to continue the plan. And so 3% of my rent is what they keep every month, but they take care of all the headache for me. And 3% of 45,000 is something that I'm willing to let go for this.
So does the rent go to them and then come to you, or the rent comes to you and you pay them the 3%?
No, so we have a tripartite agreement between me, the tenant, and No Broker. The tenant has an agreement with No Broker, and I have an agreement with No Broker as well.
Right.
So the tenant pays No Broker, and No Broker pays me.
Okay, that actually sounds pretty cool. Something that seems doable. Just have to first buy the property.
Yeah. So the one thing about rents as well, right, is that the way I look at it is almost like dividends, right?
Yeah.
So your property is growing, and within India, at least if you're decently placed in a decent locality, then you make about 3 to 4% of the market value of the property. And as long as you're aware that my property value is also increasing, that should still give you better returns than putting it in a fixed income instrument. Obviously, equity is going to be higher, but the way I've looked at it is that when I retire, we all know weight rule kind of a thing. So 3% is all that we withdraw. But then there's all kinds of risks like sequence of returns and stuff like that, right? So to me, this is a pretty good hedge in that I have a property which is going to give me 3 to 4% of the market value regardless. And so that to me is a nice cushion for my retirement plan. So that's how I would.
Any other questions, guys?
I think it was very informative.
Yeah.
That would be great. So consider that as
Yeah, I have a question. I have a question regarding what you ended with on retirement. We end up asking this to almost every guest that comes on the show about fire. I'm assuming you're familiar with the concept. The question is pretty simple. Do you have a fire number? How did you get to it?
I have a fire number. The fire number is changing. So the thing is that when I started off and when I moved to Singapore, I hired a financial advisor just to tell me whether what I'm doing with my money is accurate or not. And he took a look at my expenses, my future expenses, my needs, my wants, all of that, and then came up with a number of 15 crores. At that point, I thought 15 crores was a lot of money, but I think it's now changed in that I feel 15 crores is probably not going to be enough. And I'll need to change and it needs to go higher. But I think coming up with that number, one thing, but I have a strong suspicion that the 3% rule just doesn't work in the Indian context. The lower the 3% goes, the higher the fire number gets. That's why I think I've started diversifying and looking for these other opportunities that can give me money apart from just your salary and putting it into some instrument and then getting a fixed return out of this.
Yeah, we actually did an episode where we discussed the fact that 3% doesn't work in the Indian context. And even there's some study that happened which said maybe it's 4% for India and it needs to be slightly higher because we're still growing. So yeah, I relate because in that fire episode, I gave very similar answers. Thanks so much for coming, sharing all of this information with us. Definitely very educational for us. I'm sure we'll bring you back maybe once you have your next property. And if you've done something different with it, you can tell us what's happened. And I don't think you have to worry about the fire number. You started in a garage. There's definitely $1 billion somewhere down the line. So we are waiting for the big party when that happens. So all the best. And thank you so much for sharing all of this.
No, it's great to be here.
Thank you.